So today we're back with episode 2 of 3 on 3, and today we'll be comparing 3 watches that are very similar in one regard and very different in another. They're all handmade, independent watches for under $15,000. So Stephen, could you run us through yours?
So what we have here is the Speake-Marin Serpent Calendar. This is the 38mm version. It also comes in a 42mm, and what we have here is the white lacquered dial, not the silver dial. The movement we see here is Peter's Eros caliber, named for the statue in Piccadilly Circle in London. And the Eros caliber is a modified Technotime 738. So that's a 5-day power reserve automatic movement. And it's an extremely wearable, great everyday watch if you're looking for something that's just that little bit outside the usual.
Kelly, could you tell us about yours?
Here I have the Sarpaneva K1. It's a really avant-garde looking watch with a lot of interesting details. It's designed in Helsinki, Finland, which is really interesting. Not very many watches come out of Helsinki, or Finland for that matter. Inside we have a Soprod A10 movement. It's a stainless steel case that's around 42mm from the largest part of the notch to the other side. But what's interesting is that it wears a bit smaller because of those notches, so effectively the case size comes down to about 39mm in diameter. It's only 9mm thick. That's in part due to the movement itself, which is 3.6mm. So it wears pretty well on the wrist.
So the watch that I spent some time with is the Habring 2 Jumping Pilot. It's conceived by a couple in Austria named Richard and Maria Habring, and Richard Habring really cut his teeth in the early 90s at IWC. He's kind of responsible for the democratization of complications movement, in that he was the first guy to conceive the Doppelchronograph for IWC based on a 7750. And as soon as that patent was up, he actually made his own watch. It's also based on the 7750, but we've removed the rotor, and now you have a jumping seconds hand. You know, a deadbeat complication is something that you see in watches that are $35,000 and up. Typically, they were able to do this for an astonishing price of $5,300 US. And I think, you know, the idea of changing base movements to make them more interesting is something that I've always been fascinated by. So Stephen, tell us a little bit about what Peter has done to the movement in your Speake-Marin.
So the movement in the Speake-Marin Serpent Calendar is based on a Technotime base movement, but what Peter's done is redesign the bridges, specifically the bridge that holds the rotor, and made it kind of fit his aesthetic. And then those bridges are hand finished by his team of 10 people. You get circular graining on the main bridges, and then you have this large circular center rotor, what he calls his topping tool motif. And the rotor is beautifully crafted. Each of those edges is hand beveled and hand angled and then polished. And then there's circular graining applied to the top before it receives a blue PVD treatment. It's then also been modified to accept the central serpent hand for the calendar mechanism, which would otherwise be a date window.
And Kelly, what did Stepan do to his Soprod movement?
Well, the interesting thing is that he didn't do that much compared to the other 2 models. You can see on the back there's a really dramatic rotor, which has masses in white gold, and also the trademark Sarpaneva moon face, that's also in white gold. In addition to that, Sarpaneva added the perlage, which is visible right here through the rotors. Other than that, it's pretty much a standard A10. Sarpaneva himself actually admits that his philosophy is to concentrate more on the aesthetics overall of the watch, and as you can see, it's extremely dramatic looking from the face.
Contrary to what Stepan does, the Habrings actually spend most of their time on the movement, and this movement is spectacular for this price point. I mean, it's really just superb. It's beautiful to look at. That said, it's incredibly thick because they actually believe in modular construction, whereas most high-end watchmakers do not. This is 100% modular, and they're okay with that. They're okay with that because it allows them to make deadbeat seconds watches for $5,000. And I think there's somebody out there that really appreciates the fact that they're making these watches at these price points, and I am certainly one of them. Kelly's watch is really focused on the aesthetics in the case. My watch here, the Habring, is really focused on the movement, and I think Stephen's is kind of a nice combination of the two.
I would absolutely agree. I think what Speake-Marin was going for with this watch was something that's wearable, something that's an everyday, all-purpose sort of watch. It has a pretty traditional overall style, but then you have these little flourishes that set it apart. The Roman numerals taper toward the center of the dial. You then get a step down before you have Arabic numerals for the calendar. You have the serpent hand for the calendar mechanism and the large spade hand for the hours. All of the hands are blued steel, which set off really nicely against the white lacquered dial. This watch comes in at $11,200 US, which is by no means inexpensive. But what you're getting for that $11,200, you get an independent watch that's not so outlandish that you can only wear it occasionally.
The Habring style is completely flat. Nice applied Arabic numerals with superluminova, a stark white deadbeat seconds hand. And what's interesting to note about this watch is that with a deadbeat, you often see the seconds hand kind of miss the seconds mark on the dial. This hits it every single time. I mean, it never falters, which is really impressive. That said, the dial is rather plain. The case is rather thick, so it's not very elegant. They dedicated a lot of time and money to making these modular movements work the way that they work, and again, they work flawlessly. But I would like it a little bit thinner and a little bit more elegant. All that said, I think all of these watches are really interesting in their own way. Kelly's watch is really focused more on the aesthetic and kind of independent sourcing. The case, the dial, the hands, they all come from Finland. My watch, the Habring 2 Jumping Pilot Seconds, is really a culmination of 2 decades worth of work in creating affordable complications. And this is a fantastic movement for this price, but at a cost in terms of wearability and in terms of sleekness. And I think Stevens is kind of a nice combination of the two. It's very wearable. There's some nice attention to detail that we may not have seen in my case on the dial and case, and on Kelly's case in terms of the movement. So again, it all comes down to personal preference. These are all truly hand-assembled, independent watches, and I think they represent a great kind of positive force in watchmaking. All 3 of them, no matter the price, no matter the complication or lack of complication, they represent an independent spirit that is really appealing to guys who just genuinely love watches.